Oh no, the Notre Dame playbook. I better call for help.
I got your call, what's up?
A rival mascot stole the Notre Dame playbook. We got him to get back so we can win a national championship.
Oh my gosh, we have to help. Do you think we can find any evidence from the crime scene?
Maybe. Oh look, the mascot must have tripped over the Heisman Trophy. There might be some blood on the ground.
Oh, this is great. We can use this in our lab. We'll use a process called DNA fingerprinting to find out who did this crime.
Awesome, that's good. The football team is counting on you. You got this.
Let's go to the lab. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is the molecule that holds the blueprint for all life. It is found in nearly every cell of our bodies. DNA's information is stored in a code made up of 4 different kinds of nucleotides: adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine, organized in a double-stranded helix that forms base pairs. The human genome has about 3 million of these pairs of nucleotides. For humans, the DNA is organized into 23 pairs of chromosomes. On each chromosome, there are thousands of genes that determine our characteristics, which are also passed down from parent to child. Although 99.9% of the genome is shared between the humans, the remaining 0.01% is what makes us unique. In each sample of blood, like that found at the crime scene, there are thousands of white blood cells that each contain DNA. That DNA can be extracted in the laboratory to run a myriad of different tests.
In our case, scientists and detectives can use this DNA to help identify individuals through a process called DNA fingerprinting. We look at patterns of short tandem repeats in the genome to produce a fingerprint. Short tandem repeats are sections of the DNA that are 2 to 5 base pairs long. However, the length of that repeat at different locations or loci in the genome can differ from person to person. We call each specific short tandem repeat length an allele. When we gather DNA, we can analyze the sample by looking at different loci and seeing what alleles are present. We can then compare the sample to suspects in the case and determine if the alleles match up. However, since we're only looking at a sampling of the alleles, not the whole genome, there will be more than one person with that combination of alleles in the world. Therefore, we will use DNA fingerprinting to exclude suspects, not definitively convict them of crimes.
In order to perform DNA fingerprinting, we have to gather samples from all potential suspects. We've reached out to our biggest football rivals to obtain DNA samples from their respective mascots. Here we have samples of DNA from the Ohio State Buckeye, the USC Trojan, and the Michigan Wolverine. We also have a sample of DNA found at the crime scene. We will use gel electrophoresis to run our DNA samples and compare the similarities between the DNA. Once the gel is run, we will transfer it onto a membrane and then wash it with a probe, which can be analyzed under a special camera. Once we have the image of the DNA samples, we can come closer to learning which mascot committed the crime.
Now that we have our gel, we can compare the DNA from the crime scene to the DNA of our suspects. The first lane of the gel contains the DNA from the crime scene. The other lanes contain DNA from each of the suspects. Each lane on the gel corresponds to a short tandem repeat that we isolated from the suspect's DNA. When we run the gel, shorter repeats move faster through the gel than longer repeats, so we can determine how long each repeat is by looking at how far its band moved down the gel. Now we look at the pattern of bands on the gel and see if any of the suspects can be excluded. When we look at the gels, we compare each mascot's banding pattern to the banding pattern of the DNA found at the crime scene. 2 profiles that have the same banding pattern are a potential match. If a mascot's banding pattern does not match the banding pattern of the DNA found at the crime scene, then we can exclude that mascot from being present at the crime scene. In our case, we can see that the Michigan Wolverines' DNA banding pattern matches the one found at the crime scene, while the Ohio State Buckeyes and USC Trojans do not. It's important to remember that we're only looking at a few segments of DNA, so there are probably other people out there that match the DNA profile found at the crime scene. Because of this, we can't say for sure that the Wolverine was at the crime scene, but we do know that it was very likely and that the other mascots do not match the DNA found at the crime scene.
After analyzing the gel, we were able to determine which mascots do not match the DNA sample found at the crime scene and likely didn't commit the crime. It seems that both the Ohio State Buckeye and the USC Trojan can be excluded from our investigation. That means it's likely the Michigan Wolverine stole our playbook. However, the DNA fingerprinting can't definitely confirm that the Wolverine is guilty. It can only help us keep him as a possible suspect in this investigation. This process of DNA fingerprinting is used constantly in other real-world cases and has been very useful in solving various murder cases. It can even help exonerate men and women who have been wrongly convicted of crimes they didn't commit, such as the famous Anthony Ray Hinton case. It is important to always interpret DNA fingerprinting results and evidence with a cautious eye. Again, DNA fingerprinting cannot be used to definitely determine the guilty party in a crime, which should be kept in mind by the jury. There are many other uses for DNA fingerprinting, such as paternity testing to determine the identity of a father, or in medicine to determine good genetic matches for organ donation. But in our case, it was able to help us narrow down suspects in a crime. Come on, let's go tell the leprechaun!
After doing some DNA fingerprinting, we found that the most likely perpetrator is the Michigan Wolverine.
Of course, we've always hated them and they would have been super jealous of us. Well, I'll let the authorities know so that we can get that winning playbook back.
Go Irish!
Go Irish!